thank you all so much. It is a great pleasure and privilege for me to be back at the Constitution Center with so many friends from the Penn community whom I see here, and other Philadelphians, the extended, enlarged Penn family, and especially to be here for the launch of this book. As Dennis suggested, I cover politics, which means I cover a lot of conflict, but not very much compromise. So coming from Washington to Philadelphia, where there were so many historic compromises only a block or two from here, is a perfect setting for a truly terrific book. And for those of you who are just getting it tonight, I can tell you this is a great read. So that's the advance plug, because I wouldn't normally say that. It's just that it really is that good. I've learned a lot. It also was a way for me to relive and learn things about conflicts and compromises that I've covered over many years in Washington. So with that, I wanted to ask Dr. Gutmann and Dr. Thompson to talk about how do you govern without compromise? I mean, it was suggested in your book, you talk about Alan Simpson, whom I know very well, and Bowles Simpson, said that you can't legislate without compromising. You might as well go home. To that mind, how do we get past the gridlock? And what inspired you both to collaborate on this book? I assume there were a lot of compromises along the way.
No compromises in writing the book, but compromise has seen better days in this country, and not surprisingly, Andrea, government has seen better days in this country, and it's not surprising that at the same time when compromise is at its ebb, the popularity of our Congress is also now in single digits, or barely 10%, and you know that accounts for the families and relatives of congressmen, right? So there you go.
And we're not sure about them.
Right, exactly. So, but seriously, our diagnosis, there are many causes of this problem, but our diagnosis is that we're living in the era of a permanent campaign where every day is effectively election day. And compromise doesn't fit electioneering very well. You stand on principle and you stand up for your principles. You don't do anything about them, but you stand for them verbally, and you defeat your opponents in a campaign. And when a campaign lasts essentially forever, there's no room for governing. So that's the problem. And then you say, well, how does democracy do without governing? Not very well is the answer. And so we're looking to get people, both politicians and pundits and citizens, to recognize that it's really important to free your mind from the notion that all you do is campaign all the time and stand on principle.
And one of the things that's so wonderful about the book is you do suggest reforms and new ideas for dealing with some of the more pernicious problems that cause this mindset. We can talk about that in a moment because they include the media. So this has been really very revelatory for me as well, but it's the media, it's the money, I mean, it's all of the above. But as you write, campaigns require mutual mistrust. Dr. Thompson, that requires an uncompromising mindset. So how do you break out of those boundaries?
Well, that's it, Andrea, right on the mark. You've obviously read the book more carefully. I told her it's frightening. She has it all marked in ways.
They taught me at Penn to do my homework.
My students haven't read it that carefully. So one of the important points, actually, is that we're not against being uncompromising. We think in campaigns, as Amy suggested, you really do have to defeat your opponents. It's a zero-sum game, actually. Somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. And we don't imagine that we don't want to turn campaigns into a compromising kind of climate. The trick is, how do you switch after that and then govern? And that's the problem now. People aren't making that switch. They used to be able to do that. They used to be able to do that more even though there was always campaigning, because the campaign wasn't permanent. So some of the suggestions that we have are that to give space for governing. And maybe we should say, you know, the institutions.
Why don't we start, though, by showing what the uncompromising mindset is?
And let me set up the context, because the context
Yes.
for this is most recently the midterms, the 2010 midterms,
Right.
which elected 87 largely Tea Party-supported Republicans and created enormous conflict within the Republican House caucus, putting the Speaker, John Boehner, on the spot. And this was perhaps best illustrated, as is recounted in your book, by my friend Leslie Stahl's interview on 60 Minutes with the Speaker.
Okay, he's going to be John Boehner. He has the, and I'm going to be Leslie Stahl.
Thanks.
And we're not,
Thanks a lot,
we're
Amy.
not acting this. We're just reading it. So
Imagine sort of a deep
I didn't
tan,
volunteer for
sort of
this.
an orange hue.
you go first.
Well,
Aren't you lucky?
yes, okay, I'll try.
This is serious.
Well, I'll try. It starts actually in the interview. Obama has just a clip from Obama saying, you know, when Mr. Boehner becomes Speaker, he's going to have to govern. He can't stand on the sidelines and throw bombs. And so Boehner, we have to govern. That's what we were elected to do.
But governing means compromising.
It means working together.
It also means compromising.
It means finding common ground.
Okay, doesn't that mean compromising?
I am clear I'm not going to compromise on my principles, nor am I going to compromise the will of the American people.
So you're saying, I want common ground, but I'm not going to compromise. I don't understand that. I really don't.
When you say the word compromise, a lot of Americans look up and go, uh-oh, they're going to sell me out. And so finding common ground, I think, makes more sense.
So
We're almost finished.
look, you tried to make all the Bush tax cuts permanent, so you did compromise.
We found common ground.
Why won't you say you're afraid of the word?
I reject the word.
And that, he rejects the word.
Now, the really interesting thing about that conversation on 60 Minutes was that people in the House caucus, some of the freshmen, thought that he had been too conciliatory and were afraid that John Boehner was signaling too much flexibility. And he actually was punished within the caucus, which was beginning already to rebel, and some of his own leadership colleagues were fomenting rebellion.
I'm somewhat, you might not notice this, but I'm sympathetic to John Boehner, partly for the reason you suggested. He was sort of trying. The other reason is, this is not well known, I usually don't. If I was born and raised in Hamilton, Ohio, some of you may know that's the principal city, and if I had stayed there and hadn't freed myself, he would be my representative now.
So here's the...
That's why my imitation was so good.
So here's the reason not to be... So let me just give you the reason not to be too sympathetic. I am Leslie Stahl, right? I'm not supposed to be sympathetic to you. No, here's the reason not to be too sympathetic. Even though we know that Boehner faced lots of Tea Party representatives who were elected on a very uncompromising platform, poll after poll, as the crisis neared, showed that even a majority of Tea Party supporters wanted their own representatives to compromise. And yet the people they voted for refused to do it. So there is, I believe, real room for political leadership married with courage if you're willing to actually go out a little bit on a limb, which John Boehner was not willing to do.
Now, in the book, you look at a number of case studies, examples, and some from not such distant history that I even covered. The 1986 Tax Reform Act, Ronald Reagan was president. I was covering the Reagan White House. Tip O'Neill was the speaker. And there was a critical point where O'Neill could have let it go down. It was the president.